Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Guerra. I'm co-founder and director of corporate development at Nori. We're a carbon removal marketplace focused on reversing climate change. Climate change is an issue of too much CO2 in the atmosphere. And so what does that mean? We have to remove the excess amount of CO2. It's about 1.5 trillion tons of CO2. How do we do this? Well, broadly, stop emitting so emit less, and then remove the rest. Remove more than you've emitted in order to get to that 1.5 trillion number and to reverse the count. Carbon offsets are a key part of this. They represent some change in carbon emissions, but not all offsets are created equal. So I'm going to walk pretty quickly through three broad categories. First are reductions. So you emitted more than you did now, so that difference would represent a carbon credit for reductions like energy efficiency. Another example are avoidances, where you've moved from fossil fuel electricity to, let's say, clean wind energy to get your electricity. That is now an avoidance of emitting carbon. And then thirdly, there are carbon removals. They represent carbon that was taken from the atmosphere and stored somewhere else. These are all important mitigation strategies for climate change and useful. But it is important to note that if you've emitted a ton of CO2, the only way to truly negate that is to pay for removing that 1 ton and storing it somewhere else. For example, if you fly from San Francisco to New York City and you buy a carbon offset that represents an avoidance, it doesn't necessarily mean that CO2 that you've emitted in the atmosphere didn't happen. You just paid someone else not to emit. So to truly erase your footprint, you would want to pay for the same amount of CO2 emitted on that plane flight to be removed from the atmosphere and stored somewhere else. There are existing carbon registries and offset providers out there, but 95% of them represent those two first categories of reductions and avoidances, while less than 5% of the offsets available represent carbon removals. And so we need to massively scale up how much carbon is being removed from the atmosphere to hit this 1.5 trillion ton goal. Nori was created just to do that. We want to provide a globally scalable marketplace for transparent tracking of carbon removal with high confidence. So we have three key factors that we kept in mind when designing this marketplace, which is complete transparency. You can view project information, who did the thing, what, when, where, how much was paid for it. We also publicly share the pricing of projects and credits and how much they were sold for. Secondly, Nori will be the first end-to-end carbon marketplace where we're using the blockchain to track these credits, and it would allow for any service provider to plug into Nori's API and offer directly to their customers the ability to select at checkout, I want to erase my emissions associated with the shipping of my new pair of shoes that I'm buying, as an example. In fact, Shopify was one of our customers in the end of last year, where they bought a large amount of carbon removal through Nori in order to reverse the emissions associated with the shipping of Black Friday sales. Third, it's important to note, again and repeat, Nori is completely focused on carbon removal only. We don't work on reductions or avoidances. There are many ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere. From left to right, you have new ways of managing croplands. Actually, our croplands have a big impact on our global CO2 emissions. They can also be a big carbon sink. We can plant more trees. There's things like sea kelp, or even on the far right, we have something like direct air capture. These are more industrial ways of removing carbon. Highly expensive right now, but important in the future, and we're all hoping that this becomes more cost effective. Nori plans to enable all types of carbon removal methodologies in its marketplace, but we have to start somewhere, and we started with regenerative agriculture because it can remove annually about 10 billion tons of CO2. It's also a huge win-win because our topsoil and our land is being degraded right now with the current farming practices, and we have to be able to restore our soil to continue to feed a growing global population. So it's a win-win for climate and for the agricultural sector to adopt new practices like Trey Hill, adopt new practices like lower tillage, cover crops, etc. It allows the soil to grow its carbon content as well as retain more water. That's it. Really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please send me an email or follow me on Twitter, and happy to talk about anybody's interest in participating in our API pilot for carbon removal.